So let's continue working on our connection between frontend and backend, and let's now focus on adding places. That's something which is missing right now, which of course should work too. So in the frontend, under places, pages, new place.js, of course I want to send a request here in the place submit handler instead of console logging this here. Now that shouldn't be too hard. We can import our custom hook. So we import use HTTP client from the shared folder, the hooks folder, the HTTP hook file, and then just as before, execute this here in this new place component. Use object destructuring to get the interesting pieces out of it, like is loading, error, send request, and of course clear error. And now we can use all of that here. So for example, here once we submitted the place, I want to send my request, of course. The URL here is http localhost 5000/API/places. And then let's check our backend. Here under places routes, we see for creating a new place, it's really just / nothing thereafter. It is a post request as we just saw on the backend. And for the data which is attached, it has to be JSON data here. So I'll stringify this and pass in an object which needs to have a title, needs to have a description, needs to have an address, and also important on the places controller in the create place function, we see we also try to extract the creator. So the ID of the user who is responsible for this place. So we should provide all that information here. Title, of course, here is form state inputs.title.value, because on this form we are managing title, description, and address. So we can also copy this to also pass on the description from form state inputs description, and then here the address from form state inputs address. Now for the creator, we have a problem. At the moment, we're not really managing the user ID here on the front end in a central place. Now, with the help of our auth context, we could actually do that. We're currently just managing is logged in here. We could also manage a user ID here, which initially, let's say, is null, which we then want to send once a user is logged in. So here in app.js, where we do manage the data for our auth context, we could manage user ID as a new state and set user ID here. On login, on this login function, we could expect the user ID, the UID as an argument, and then call set user ID here and set it to that user ID. And when we log out, we reset it and set user ID back to null. And then we feed that user ID back into our context. So down there, where we set the value, we now also set user ID, and we set it to the user ID state we're managing here. Now, actually, we could wire this all up and go to the auth page. And there, when we call login, we want to forward that ID we get back. So here from send request, we do actually get back response data, both for logging in and for signing up. And if we have a brief look at the backend again, we see the data which we do get back there in sign up, for example, is our created user here. And the same for logging in. There we also, in the end, can return our user. At the moment, I'm just returning a message here, but I can return existing user to object getters true here and map that to a user property. With this, we return the user there as well. And on that user object, we of course can get the ID. So we can save this on the backend. And on the front end, response data now has the ID. So on response data, we can now access a certain key. And for that, let's go back to the backend real quick again. For logging in, it's the user key which holds our user. For signing up, it's the same. So we access .user here, .id, and that should be our user ID. We can do that both for signing up and for logging in. And now we should actually manage that ID globally in our frontend. And now back on new place, creator is actually the ID of the user, which we can now get from our auth context. So there we just need to import use context from React and import auth context from this file here. So import of context from shared context of context. And then in here, simply get access to this by using our auth context. This sets up a listener to our context here in the new place component. And on this auth object, we can now retrieve the user ID. That's the idea, at least. So here we can point at auth user ID and attach this to the outgoing request as well. Now let's add async in front of this function here so that here we can use await so that we know once this is done. I also want to wrap this with try catch so that we can continue differently in a success case than we do in an error case. So here in the error case, I don't need to do anything actually because we set the error state inside of our hook. But in the success case, I later want to redirect the user to a different page. We can do this as a next step though. For the moment, let's instead take advantage of isLoading and error and clear error. And for that, I will again import components we used before. The error modal from shared components, UI elements, error modal, and also import the loading spinner from shared components, UI elements, loading spinner. And now we can use that here if we scroll down to our JSX code. And for one, wrap the form with React fragment so that we can have multiple top-level JSX elements here. Because next to the form, I want to add my error modal here and forward a potential error we might be having. And on clear, on the other hand, just as before, should point at the clear error function. And for the loading state inside of the form, I will check if we are loading. And if we are loading, I want to render the loading spinner in that as overlay mode, which I set by adding this prop. If we now save this, let's give it a try. Let's go back here and log in real quick. That hopefully sets our user ID. And I now go to add place and add a place here like the Marienplatz, a great place in Munich. And the address is Marienplatz 1 in Munich, let's say. And I click add place, I get an error. Invalid inputs passed. Please check your data. Okay, let's check the outgoing request in the network tab. There, this red request is the one which failed. And let's see, what did we attach as data? I did attach all my data here, including the creator, so that's looking good. We got that user ID as it seems. And still I got back invalid inputs passed, please check your data. So something was not liked about that data which I attached here. And yeah, I know what the problem is. It can be difficult to spot this issue though. When I send the request here in new place, I do add the URL, the method, and the body. What am I not setting here? The headers. And I said we would need to add the content type header and set it to application JSON. Otherwise, the body parser on the backend would not be able to parse that. And correctly, therefore, the backend would not find the appropriate data. So now with that added here, with this header added on the front end, let's try this again. Let's log in again, create a place here, the Marienplatz, a great place in Munich, and add this address and click add place. And now at least we get a different error. It fails, but with a different error. The message is creating place failed. Please try again. It's a 500 status code, so not a validation error. And this error now has a very tricky error source. Keep in mind that on the back end, we're working with transactions here, right? And if you're working with transactions, this on-the-fly collection creation, which normally works, won't work. So you need to make sure that you first of all create a new places collection here in your database before this operation can succeed. This is of course just a one-time task. You only do this when you set up your application for the first time. With the places collection added here, if we now click add place, this should succeed. And this is looking pretty good to me. We get back a success status code. We're not redirected because we have no logic for that, but we do get the right status code. And if we now inspect our places collection here, we should see our new place here. We see it points at a user who ends with 15E7. And if we have a look at our users, we see that's this first user. And there, if we have a look at the places array, we see that ID of the place we just added, which ends with 05616. That's this place. So storing places works. Now on the front end, I just want to make sure that if we do succeed, so here instead of this comment, we really do redirect. And that's easy to do. We can import something from React router DOM, and that's the use history hook from React router DOM. So it's a custom hook provided by this package, you could say. And it's very easy to use. You just execute it. Let's say here after our custom hooks, we call use history. And this gives you a so-called history object, which you can store in a constant. A constant I will here name history. The name is up to you. And you can then use this to redirect, because this history object has a push and a replace method, for example, which allows you to go to a new page by adding it on the stack or by replacing the current page. And here I want to allow the user to go back after the navigation, so I will push. And I will push the user to /nothing, so to the starting page. With that, if we save all of that and we create another place here in our application, we first of all need to log in. Later, we will ensure that users stay logged in. For the moment, we'll have to re-log in. And then I will add a new place here, Empire State Building, an amazing skyscraper. And here I search for Empire State Building in New York. Let's see whether that works. If I click Add Place, this seems to work and we are redirected, as you can clearly tell. And now just to double check, if we reload this page here in the collections screen, we should now see two documents, and one of them is the Empire State Building with the automatically fetched location and so on. And our user with whom I logged in should now have two places at whom it points. So this is working, and with that, let's ensure that now that we can add places, we can also fetch them on a per user basis if I click on a user. And don't worry that they're all looking the same here. Later, we will add a functionality to upload your own profile picture. So for now, let's make sure that when I click on max here, I do actually fetch the actual places of that user. Of course, that is something you can try on your own first before we then do it together in the next lecture.